Yeah. Okay. Yep. Hello, everyone in the comments saying hi.
Hey.
Yeah, sound's working now. So as I was saying before, welcome back. I'm with Mrs Cory. So do get your English questions in and let us know what exam board you're doing. You're doing OCR, AQA, EdXL, so that we can help you in the best way. Yeah. So maybe just recap what you were saying before.
Yeah. Tomorrow you'll have your English Language Paper 1. That is for the students who didn't do coursework. And if you did coursework, your exam will be on Friday, which is paper 2. So tomorrow, you're going to be having to, generally for all 3 of the exam boards, section A is going to be very much about reading and retrieving information. So it might say, what are the feelings of Jack in lines 1 to 5? And you need to pick that information out. And then also to infer it. So, Mrs Cory walked in the classroom and slammed the door, what's her mood? And they'll ask you for those kind of things.
Question from Harry, hi Harry, who says, in the structure question, can you talk about the syntax of sentences for a structure technique, GCSE AQA?
Generally, you need to be talking about language and structure. And they will come together. When you talk about structure, you might start by explaining at the start of the extract. Remember, the examiners never choose an extract without carefully picking the beginning and the end. There'll be a turn in there, and something will happen. It could be very, very subtle. It could be really explicit and blatant in there. So you need to make sure you're going through that. I would typically go with, initially it starts this way, it progresses into the mood shifts, and I would use some, those kind of sentence starters, and then maybe going in, rather than in conclusion, I would go with, the writer leaves us with, and this impression is on the writer, on the reader. So you need to be going through and talking about structure, but they kind of go in line as well. You can't achieve a good grade without talking about language and structure, but sometimes you can talk about them together. Maybe the forcefulness of the language might change. So you might say, as the structure, as the tone shifts going through, and that will show that you're commenting on the structure as well.
Yeah. A lot of people saying they're doing AQA, so that's cool.
Yeah.
And Isabel actually says, for AQA, should you write about context?
No, it won't ask you for that. You won't need to know. These are unseen texts, and you won't need to know a lot about context. I would avoid introductions of any sort. If they gave you, for example, if they gave you an extract from Lord of the Flies, you might want to say this is during World War II, but I wouldn't go into any detail of that. They are asking you to look at how language is used. Which will be your question 2. Question 1 will be retrieval. Again, it will give you in lines 1 to 5, pick out 3 words that show that Jack's very unhappy, and then, or 2 words, and then it will be how is the language used, follow the bullet points going through, and then they'll ask you to go through the whole text. And with the whole text, I would track through and be thorough and be thoughtful as you're going through. So start talking about how it initially opens for you, where the turn or twist is in it, and how it ends, and maybe if it leaves you on a cliffhanger, those kind of things.
Yeah. A lot of people asking, in what order would you recommend that we answer the questions in?
That's up to you. I haven't taught AQA for many years, so your teacher will know the best way for you, and they might even have asked you to do that to your strengths as an individual in your class, because that's what I will do. However, you will find that the text that you read in section A will sometimes give you ideas towards your description or narrative writing. There will be something in there that might even set the scene for you, and then they would maybe ask you to write about a time in which describe something when something went wrong, and there might have been hints of that in the text that might start your thought process going.
Yeah. Aaliyah says, please could you give me some tips in order for us to get a grade 9?
Grade 9, the exam boards, for all of the exam boards, are looking for you to be have a sophisticated style with your writing. So you need to ensure that you are using a range of wide and varied vocabulary, and where you're being the words you're using as well are really apt for the situation. So and the language will I'm trying to think of the best words, the irony. So your language will come across, and it will be really on point. Is that for the situation you're describing? It depends on whether you're doing the description or the narrative. You need to make sure as well that you've clearly planned that from the beginning. You will need to show a really firm plan in your writing from beginning, middle and end. And if you go for the description, even if you bring that back around into you take them back, show the passing of time, all those really sophisticated tips that your teacher would have given you in class on how best to approach I really haven't got my words tonight, Charlotte, have I?
Yeah.
I really haven't. The best way for you to make it feel like it's a whole piece, even though you've only got a very short time in which to write that.
Yeah. Tom Essex says, how important is correct punctuation?
Very important. You need to make sure you definitely need to be using capital letters and full stops. Especially for pronouns. So if you're talking about characters, talking about places, you really must remember to put those capital letters in as well. They can bring you down on your SPAG marks, your spelling, punctuation and grammar marks. With a range of punctuation, if you're writing, you need to make sure that you show a wide range of punctuation. So I would put my ellipses in there somewhere. I would try and use a semicolon. And now remember, a semicolon is where you have two main clauses that are related, and you use a semicolon between them rather than a full stop. So maybe if you've got two shorter sentences, you could use the semicolon between them, or it equally works with two longer complex sentences as well. So I'd try and get a semicolon in there as well. But you do need to show a wide range of punctuation and use it correctly.
Yeah, we had a question from Aaliyah saying, is there any SPAG marks in this paper? So
which paper are you doing, Aaliyah?
Yeah, do let us know. Eric says, what is narrative writing?
Narrative, that's where you write a story. So you for AQA, let me have a little look. AQA and for Edexcel, you will be asked to write a piece of imaginative writing or creative writing, and both of those will expect you to you've got a choice. For example, I've got the exam paper here for Edexcel from last year, which is it's the sample exam paper. So they asked you to write about a time when you or someone you know tried to hide something. So that sounds to me as if that would be a bit more of a narrative where you're explaining the story and you're going through it. And then the second question is, look at these images, write about a frightening experience. That one you could put into, both of those fit to narrative, but you could put them more into a description of it where you're describing it and you're not putting a character in there as such, but you're describing what's going through.
Cool. Aaliyah says, I'm doing AQA English Language Paper 1, and then she says, in your opinion, which is harder, paper 1 or paper 2?
That depends. It depends on your skills, because AQA paper 2, I haven't got a copy of it with me. I'm really sorry. Could you please, if you can tell me what the paper's called, paper 2, I will do my best to work that out. But paper 1 is the creative reading and writing. So it's where they're going to give you a piece of unseen literature, and you have to go through and find the information with the reading skills in there. And then the section question 5 and 6, I think, is descriptive writing and narrative writing. So they fit on both skills. If you let us know what paper 2 is called, I'll be able to give you some advice on that.
Yeah.
What's,
A lot of people saying they're doing...
Is that a tika or a lib? I can't see.
Aaliyah says there are any spag marks in AQA Language Paper 1.
Wait there. There's definitely for the second section, technical accuracy. So you have got, your technical accuracy comes out of 12 marks. So to look at the top of, at the bottom end of that band, it's saying that you are using very simple vocabulary. And at the top end, no, forgive me. The bottom end, you're using very simple sentence structures. It's occasional use of standard English, accurate basic spelling. So like that would be your key stage 2 words rather than your key stage 3 even. At the top end of that, there's 16 marks available for you. And you will be, all of your sentences will be correctly punctuated. There'll be a wide range of punctuation used, and there will be a high level of accuracy, and it will be a full range of vocabulary. High level of accuracy in spelling, including ambitious vocabulary. So but if your spelling is not your thing, when the examiners mark these, they've got level 1 to level 4, and sometimes you can be between the two. Say your spelling isn't really great, but your accuracy on other words, so you could end up with 9 to 12 marks because your accurate spelling, 5 to 8 marks, but your complex words, but not your ambitious vocabulary. But the fact that you're using the ambitious vocabulary is going to get you your higher marks out of the content, which is out of level 2, level 3, level 4. So your content then comes into that it's out of 20 marks. So that will be covered there.
Cool. Siren says, for paper 1 question 4, I'm presuming AQA, do we need to do an introduction or a conclusion?
No, definitely not. And all 3 of the papers where they ask you, how has the writer done this? What is your impression of this? Do not go into an introduction at all, or very, very briefly. The writer does it in many ways. You know, you just need to get on. You need to really get on. I've been looking through some of the examiner reports, and one of them says, it clearly says that one of the mistakes that has been made is that they are taking far too much time doing an introduction. Where is it? I got the actual quote here. No need for an introduction. Get straight into your answer. Remember to focus upon the question and not simply spot in features without relating them back to the focus of the question. So that's Edexcel's advice from the chief examiner. Don't do it for any of them. AQA or OCR. You're wasting words, wasting time. You need to be commenting on and analysing the language that's been used and the structure that's been used to get the marks.
Awesome. Aaliyah, who we spoke to before, said, you asked what paper 2 is called. It's called Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives. And then again, she's asked which do you think is harder?
I'm not too sure, Aaliyah, but that sounds as if that's reading. If you've got a copy of the paper in front of you, it will say, if it's paper 1, it says it's creative writing and reading. It depends on your skills. If you're a perceptive reader, if you can read a text and go a piece of literature, and you can work out what the writer's wanting you, the avenue he's taking you down. And if you're one of these people who are quite good at whodunit, and you can work out who's done it before it's all given to you at the end, your skills are with reading, and that's where you can interpret things and you can read between the lines. But if you're really good at creative writing, then that's going to be your thing. It's very, very subjective to you as an individual.
Yeah. Matteo says, is 16 words per line for 6 pages enough?
Again, it's quality and not quantity.
I'd say that as well.
Yeah, it depends. Do they tell you, on all of these mark schemes I've looked at, they're not giving you a word count to write. I know CIE give you a word count, but it's not CIE. We're not looking at CIE. All the rest of them, they're just asking you, for example, here, OCRs, write a speech to your classmates, make sure you cover X, Y, and Z. And again, imagine if writing from Edexcel is again just saying write about a time. It could be real or imagined. Spend 45 minutes on this section. So it depends on you how long you've got to focus on that section rather than how many words.
Definitely. Fahana says, how many semicolons do I need to get a grade 7?
I'd use a couple.
Yeah.
A grade 7 is the in old money is an A, and as an A student I'd be expecting them to use a semicolon a couple of times in their writing to show that they can use it. Make sure you're using it accurately. Again, I think I've said this, but make sure that you can go on Google tonight and have a little look if you're unsure, but it's where you've got two main clause and they're joined together and they relate. So, for example, the cat sat on the mat, semicolon, the dog was upset by not being able to sit on the mat. And it's where you've got two simple sentences or two compound sentences with their main clause and they're joined together.
Cool. Siren says, any predictions for question 5 AQA? Last year it was a picture of a face, so just wondering if you had any predictions.
No predictions at all. We're on the third. Yeah, it could absolutely be anything. Let me see what the question is this year, and it tells me what the picture was. Question 5, you say. Oh, last year it said you've been entered into a writing competition. Write a description suggested by this picture, and it was a picture of a coastline in a really bad storm, and so it could be anything. They will come up. Sometimes the questions of question 5 are linked to some of the text. Not all the time, but they can be. Yeah.
Gia says, tips for question 3, particularly structure.
Again, question 3. So is this question 3 for AQA?
I'm presuming so. Yeah, AQA.
Yeah, so that question is, how is language used in this line to this line? And it's giving you bullet points. So let me find question 3 so we can look at it. So it's the whole text. So the fact it isn't from line to line. So you need to think about the whole text, and it says the text is from an opening of a novel. What the writer focuses on, your attention at the beginning, how and why. So what are they focusing you on? What is the subject of that extract? How have they done it? That's your devices, but don't just technique spot. That's like a 2-year-old in a pram going, look, mummy, there's an aeroplane. You don't want to do that. You must say how it's been used and why it's been used, and always relate it back to your question. And the question here is, how has the writer structured the text to interest you? Please do not say to make me read on, because that is a comment and you need analysis for the higher grade. All right, so you need to say, why do you want to read on? What has it brought to you? And you can put your own perspective on this. For me, and to analyse is sometimes where you look at two sides of an argument and you weigh it up. So you could even say, one reader might see this, however, another reader. And you can do some of that analysis in there as well, that measuring it up. And so it's definitely how you do it and why you do it. And I would go through methodically and make myself a small plan. And I would track through one of the exam boards says thoughtfully and thoroughly. So I would thoroughly go through and see where the changes are, how they've introduced us to it, and make it interesting for us, and why they've done that. And don't just say to read on.
Yeah, definitely. So we've had a few what is this questions. So Emily says, what's an oxymoron? And Fahana says, what's a compound sentence?
Okay, a compound sentence, I'll start with that one first, is where you've got two main clause. So a main clause is where you've got a subject, an object and a verb. The cat sat on the mat. And a compound would be where you put in a connective in there. So however, it could be the cat sat on the mat, however, the dog sat on the chair, or but, and it's putting in, I call them fanboys. My old head of English years ago called them fanboys. and it's FANBOYS, which is for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And there's some of your connectives that you could use to go through and to make a compound sentence. So think it's like concrete. It's a mixture. A complex sentence, however, is one with a subordinate clause. Walking into the room, comma, Mrs Cory slammed the door. So the walking into the room does not make sense on its own. That is your subordinate clause. And your main clause, Mrs Cory walked into the room. You need to make sure you've got a range of those. The first part was, what is an oxymoron?
Yeah.
Oxymoron is where you... an oxymoron. Do you know what? I've gone dead. What is an oxymoron? An oxymoron is... Give me a minute, I'm thinking about that one.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
I don't know, I can't think.
We had a really good one from Aaliyah before, which said, with your expertise, what would you say is the most... the biggest downfalls that people will make for English language?
Not answering the question. Number one, not answering the question. Not referring your work back to the question. Relating it back up, making sure you've covering that. Number two. Number three, technique spotting on its own, because that is definitely, that's a level, that's a grade 3, grade 2 even, maybe, if you just go through and you've asked how has the writer done something, and you only say they've used a simile here and put in evidence. Failing to put in evidence, you must back everything up. Every single one of the examples will ask you what, how, why, and refer and make reference to the text, or use quotations, or put in evidence, and you need to make sure you're doing all of those things.
For going back to the oxymoron thing, Wild 171 says oxymoron is a figure of speech in which apparently contradictory terms appear in conjunction, e.g. faith unfaithful kept him falsely true.
Yeah, like bittersweet. Shakespeare used them all the time, oxymorons, but they are a bit of a cliche, so be very careful if you're using them in your writing. But it's where you put two concepts together, two things together, and they're opposites, and it exaggerates the point that you're making.
Yeah,
thank you for that. Thank you.
How could you explain the effect on the reader without saying it makes us want to read on?
Well, you need to think about what it is. So it makes me want to... I have to bring everything back to Harry Potter. They've just left you on a cliffhanger. I don't know. Hermione's just gone into a room and there's a big dog in there, or whatever it is, and the chapter ends. And how do they do it? We want to know the outcome for the character. We're worried about the character. We want to see what... not so much we want to see what happens next, but we want to know... the outcome, where it's those kind of things. You need to just explain a little bit more rather than you want to read on. That's what you would have been taught to do for your SATs in year 6, or even, you need to explain in more detail to get a 5 and above.
Yeah,
okay?
Definitely. Gia says tips for detailed analysis.
Again, I would always make sure it's the why. The writer's done it. So the what is the quote. You make a point, you evidence it with what is the evidence in there, how they've done it, and then I would always explain that effect of that how, and then it's the why they've done it. And sometimes as well you can look at varying viewpoints. It's something you would have been doing in literature, for some of your literature texts, but it works in language as well. So it's where you look at how different perspectives and different people and how it might be seen. It could be seen this way, on the other hand it could be seen this way. And that was where the last video I shared a sheet with you, which it had information on there about how to connect it. On the other hand, however, subsequently, similarly, and it would be you doing those exact same things again, but looking in more detail and trying to explain it further, and that is analysing.
Yeah, definitely. We're getting a lot of tips for question 5, so I'm assuming that's AQA. If anyone wants to correct me, then...
Is this, again, if it's AQA, let me go back to my front of my sheet. Oh, this is the creative writing.
Yeah.
I would always If it depends on you. Are you good at making up a story? Because you need to make sure, they'll usually ask you to write the opening of a story, but you need to leave it somewhere, and that needs to be planned. There needs to be, even with an opening, a beginning, a middle and an end. And it might be a cliffhanger, or it might be, but it usually would be, because that would be the end. It's almost as if you're writing a chapter. But for me, for my students, and for years, many of my students were in the CD borderline, CB borderline, so that is the students who are on a 4, 5, 6. And I would suggest to them that they write a descriptive piece, because you can go in and you can plan. Say, for example, I asked you to write about a description of a park. You start at one point, you can move around the scene, and you can bring it back to that point where you maybe near where you started, show the passing of time, maybe the sun setting as you've been there, or the sun rising, and you can show movement as well. I would opt, but if you are good at story writing, or if you've been prepared and prepped by your teacher and they've said, come up with some plans of stories which you might be able to apply, because some teachers will do that. They might say, have a few ideas of plots of where you could take something. That will be your best option. It definitely depends on you. If you're stuck, go for the description, write a little plan, right, I'm going to take them to this place and this, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to talk about that, I'm going to talk about this, okay? But don't use the word then, like I just did.
Yeah. Last few minutes, guys, so get your questions in. Amar says, any tips for transactional writing?
That's on Friday, transactional writing. Now remember that it is transaction, so they're going to be asking you to write a speech. They're tricky, watch them. They'll ask you to write a talk, which is the same, it's writing a speech. They might ask you to write a blog, which is just a quirky article, okay? It's just the same as article writing. They might ask you to write sometimes a diary, or that kind of, a letter, that the old favourite, the letter. You must follow the formats. There are clear formats for each of those, and you must make sure you are clear with the format and you know your format. So you need to do some revision, and you need to make sure you know how to lay out a letter, how to lay out an article, and the different things that come with that. Years ago they used to ask for leaflets. I haven't seen any of those, but I'm not saying they won't come up. And you need to know, a leaflet will maybe have, it's going to have a heading, it's going to have subheadings. Equally with an article, sometimes they put subheadings in them. Your letter is going to have that valediction and that salutation. So you need to have in there, dear Auntie May, love from Peter. You need to make sure, or if they've asked you to write a formal letter, you need to remember that sir and sincerely do not go together, the two S's. So if you don't know the person's name, to the editor, it's yours faithfully. You're writing with faith because you don't know whether they're going to appreciate your letter, okay? So if it's dear sir, it's with faith. If it's dear headmaster, or dear Mr. Jones, the headmaster, you're going to write yours sincerely.
Yeah, definitely.
I can see that one on there from Mia.
Yes.
Saying about how would you do a leaflet? And you need to make sure a leaflet, it can have bullet points. You must have, it's the same as writing any piece of non-fiction writing. You will have topic sentences to start your paragraph, and then you will go into further detail. So say they gave you something to read, and then they ask you to write a leaflet on recycling. You would have what the different types, so you might start with general recycling, then it might be recycling at home, recycling in the classroom, and you would have your key subheadings as you go through with your topic paragraph. You need to make sure with all of those who you're addressing your audience. So make sure you know who your audience is and you are talking to them.
Okay, so final question. William says, do you have any impressive vocab I could use for creative writing?
You're asking the person who just couldn't remember what an oxymoron was. It depends on your situation. It really does. I would get some reading in tonight. Pick up a novel, read it. Make some notes of some really good words that you come up with. That would be my only advice. Also, while you're reading that novel, you're going to help yourself with section A, because you're going to be inferring and think to yourself, why has the writer put that little gem in there? Why are they doing it? Why are they doing that? And look at the way the language has been used and the way that extract's been structured, and that's going to help you. So tonight you're going to bed with a book.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you, Mrs Cory. We just had a comment saying help me with business, so we'll be back at 7:15 with Mr Fotheringham to answer all your business questions, so definitely join us then. Thank you, Mrs Cory. Thank you guys for watching, and good luck.